History is full of wild stories, but few are as bizarre as this one. Imagine being so hated that even after you've been dead for years, your enemies dig up your body, put you on trial, and then execute you. Yes, this actually happened. And the man at the centre of this strange tale? None other than Oliver Cromwell, one of the most prominent men in British history. Before we continue, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. We're new here on YouTube, but we'll be bringing you many more stories like this in the near future. Thank you. Cromwell was a man who went from a quiet country life to leading an army that overthrew a king. But while this made him a legend and an integral part of the life story of Britain, it was what happened after he died that really raised eyebrows. Today, we'll be exploring the incredible and totally bonkers story of Oliver Cromwell's posthumous trial. Yes, you heard that right, a trial after death. And trust me, it is as crazy as it sounds. Oliver Cromwell wasn't always the feared leader who toppled a king. He started out in the quiet town of Huntingdon, about an hour and a half north of London. Born in 1599, a young Oliver was, well, pretty unremarkable. He spent a brief stint at Cambridge University, but after just a year, he dropped out. Apparently, academia wasn't his thing. Instead, Cromwell returned to his country life, where he spent his days grumbling about the weather and dabbling in local politics. He even made it to Parliament as the representative for Huntingdon, though it's safe to say he wasn't exactly setting the political world on fire. At this point, Cromwell was just another country gentleman, until England started to fall apart. The country was on the brink of chaos, with arguments over religion, power, and the so-called divine rights of kings. Which is just a fancy way of saying, hey, I'm the king, and I can do whatever I want, whenever I want. Naturally, this didn't really sit well with Parliament. Enter Oliver Cromwell. The man who had once spent more time thinking about turnips than tactics, suddenly found himself in the middle of a civil war. And here is the twist. Cromwell wasn't just good at leading troops, he was bloody brilliant. He raised an army, fought for Parliament, and quickly became the star of the Puritan cause. By 1646, his forces had captured King Charles I, and suddenly, the former country gentleman was at the centre of England's biggest political showdown. What did he do to Charles, the former king? Well, he killed him, obviously. So, what do you do after helping to execute a king? If you're Oliver Cromwell, you step into the power vacuum. When Parliament offered him the crown, Cromwell famously refused. The thought of being a king was just too old school for him. Instead, he took on a new title, Lord Protector of England, Scotland, and Ireland. As Lord Protector, Cromwell was essentially England's head of state. But he wasn't interested in being just another monarch. His vision was something completely different. An attempt to create a republic, governed not by a king, but by what he hoped would be a righteous and godly leadership. Cromwell's rule was marked by a deep sense of religious zealotry. A devout Puritan, he believed that England should be a nation guided by strict moral codes and a strong hand. This led to a series of controversial policies aimed at purifying the nation. Banning Christmas celebrations, for example, closing theatres, and enforcing strict Sabbath observance. His government's crackdown on what they considered immoral behaviour didn't win him many friends. To the Puritans, of course, Cromwell was a hero, enforcing God's will on earth. To others, he was a tyrant, suffocating the joy and traditions out of everyday life. Cromwell's zeal wasn't just confined to England. He launched brutal military campaigns in Ireland and Scotland, further solidifying his power but leaving a legacy of violence and resentment that echoes to this very day. Cromwell eventually died in 1658, leaving behind a divided legacy, and a nation uncertain about its future. But as we'll see, his story was far from over. By 1660, England had had enough of Cromwell's Puritan rule. With Cromwell dead and his son Richard proving a weak successor, the country was ready for a change. Enter Charles II, the son of the executed Charles I, who returned from exile to reclaim the throne in what became known as the Restoration. Charles II's return marked the end of England's brief experiment with republicanism and led to the restoration of the monarchy. But this wasn't just about reclaiming the throne. It was about settling old scores. Charles II had a long memory, and there was no forgetting what happened to his father. For the royalists who had suffered through Cromwell's rule, this was a moment of vindication. But mere political victory wasn't enough. The desire for revenge ran deep, especially against those who had signed Charles I's death warrant, Oliver Cromwell chief among them. But there was a small problem. Cromwell was already dead. So, how do you exact revenge on a man who's already met his maker? The answer was as shocking as it was gruesome. You put his corpse on trial, of course. In January 1661, on the 12th anniversary of Charles I's execution, Cromwell's body was exhumed. In a macabre twist of justice, the dead man, literal rotting corpse, was put on trial for treason and regicide. God, imagine the smell. It's not every day you see a 3-year-old decaying body on trial, but hey, this was 17th century England, where anything was possible. The charges were clear: treason and regicide. Of course, with Cromwell being dead and all, his defence was less than lively. The prosecution, however, was relentless. After all, this was about making a statement. A final act of revenge against the man who had dared to challenge the monarchy. With the verdict in, Cromwell's corpse was taken to Tyburn, a site infamous for public executions. There, his body was hanged in chains. A grim display meant to humiliate the man who had already been dead for 3 years. But they didn't stop there. Next, his head was severed from his body and placed on a spike outside Westminster Hall, where it would remain for the next 24 years. It was a macabre trophy for the royalists, a constant reminder to anyone who might consider following in Cromwell's footsteps. For nearly a quarter of a century, Cromwell's head sat there, exposed to the elements and the curious gazes of passers-by. It became an eerie symbol of the price of defying the crown. But even then, Cromwell's story wasn't quite finished. Eventually, Cromwell's head was removed and passed from one curious collector to another, even going on display a few times. It wasn't until 1960, yes, you heard that right, 1960, that his head was finally laid to rest. And so, after years of being paraded, spiked, and sold off, Oliver Cromwell's head finally found peace. It's a bizarre and almost surreal chapter of British history, where the pursuit of revenge crossed the line into the utterly absurd, but it also serves as a powerful reminder of just how deep the wounds of civil war can run. Oliver Cromwell is one of those figures in history who defies easy categorization. Hero or villain, tyrant or protector, his legacy is as complex and divided as the nation he once ruled. On one hand, Cromwell is remembered as the man who led the parliamentary forces to victory in the English Civil War. He helped to establish a republic and for a brief moment brought stability to a war-torn country. His military genius and unwavering commitment to his cause reshaped England forever. But there's another side to his legacy, one marked by religious intolerance, harsh rule, and a puritanical vision for England that many found suffocating. His crackdown on cultural and religious practices made him deeply unpopular with large sections of the population. His posthumous trial and brutal treatment of his corpse are perhaps the most telling signs of how divisive his legacy was. For the royalists, it was a final symbolic victory, a way to erase Cromwell's impact and restore the monarchy's honour. But even this outlandish act couldn't erase Cromwell from history. The trial of his dead body, as crazy as it was, only adds to the complex tapestry of his historical image. What is clear is that Oliver Cromwell left a mark on England that is impossible to ignore. The man who refused to be king became one of the most powerful figures in British history, and even in death, he continued to challenge the very fabric of the nation. So, was the trial of Cromwell's corpse a fitting end for such a divisive leader, or just a petty act of revenge? That's for history to decide. Thank you all very much for watching. If you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe to The White Light on YouTube. Until next time, try not to behead a king. Bye.